We're back.
We're
a
back.
lot later than expected. We had lofty goals to try to do some stuff over the Christmas and New Year's holidays. They didn't happen, unfortunately.
We did.
But
we're
a
horrible college football podcast.
Yeah, but you know what? Family is more important. So
that's true.
You guys have a good Christmas and New Year's?
It was lovely. It was good. It's good. We've been sick for the
past
a lot
3 weeks. While you're doing that at the same time to answer that, Luke, by the way.
Sorry.
He's like, yeah, it was great.
I'm not drinking anything.
I pick up other habits.
No, that's water. It's water in a tiny glass.
It's just water. Little tiny for water.
It's water.
How was your foray into Nashville?
Oh, it was Nashville, rainy, dreary, and that's about what Nashville was.
Yeah. Well, so catching up on a personal level, that's always good. We have a lot to catch up on.
We have even
football level
to catch up on a football level. Yeah, so let's get into that.
Let's do it. Grab a drink. We'll be back in a second.
Yep. Cool.
Right. All right. So if I remember correctly, what did we talk about the last time? Obviously,
we talked about the playoffs. They were set it was right before the first round of the playoffs. And we're into the new season where Ohio State is a completely different team than they were during the actual season.
I still don't believe it.
All year.
Who knows what happens? I mean, again, as we've said in the chat, because that's the thing. We might not have been here, but we were chatting individually.
We
were talking. I mean, if this Ohio State team showed up at the beginning of the year, they would have had a bye, which might actually have been a bad thing, as we'll
get into
later.
Yeah. We still have lost to Michigan, though. Is actually still the real question.
Probably not.
Probably not.
Yeah, probably not. But see, hypothetical games, that's an SEC thing. We're not going to get into that.
Right. Yeah, you guys still undefeated somehow. I don't know how y'all do it.
Hypothetical championships.
That's right. That first weekend was full of blowouts. My team was one of them. It was there.
Well, and I think the hard part of that for me was, obviously a lot of the talking heads, ESPN, all these people talked about how all the blowouts were indicative of why it's wrong, why the playoff system and how everything is going is wrong. And I tend to disagree with that.
Yep.
You see a lot of teams and like we'll talk about like NCAA in college basketball, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's not always upsets. There's not always the Cinderella stories don't always happen.
Mm-hmm.
But when they do, it's a lot of fun. And I think this is one of those perfect examples of, you had some teams that, Boise State, some Arizona States that got buys that ended up getting blown out. Not really blown out. Ended up getting beat in the second round, not Arizona State. But I think it's just one of those things like you're going to see this. You're going to see it. And the seeding, I think, is the most interesting question. Is how things are going to be seeded, not necessarily who should have been in or out of the playoffs.
Sure. Yeah. Well, and I think there's a couple things that we learned. There are certain things of like, I could say with pretty good confidence that teams like Arizona State deserve to be there. Mm-hmm. They showed that this past week in the second round. Boise State, on the other hand, I don't know. Like they'd had a decent game against Penn State, but it wasn't. I don't know.
I feel like it wasn't. There's some people who talk about it being a very dominant game by Penn State. I still wouldn't say that either.
No.
Boise State was actually just a few plays. If it wasn't for that touchdown being called back for a holding call, I think it was. The game easily could have been 21 to possibly 24. Because that and the whole play call, Boise State had to change the entire fourth quarter where they couldn't be, even 60-40 passing, throwing, or passing, running, they had to literally just be, hey, 95% of the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think Boise State had some uncharacteristic mistakes. Genty, I think, had a fumble. Maybe, two.
Yeah, in the very beginning of the game.
So, like, there were some of those things where it's like, some of that I think is going to be the fact that they did not play that level of defense. And so, things like covering up the ball, like that's one of the things Ohio State preaches all the time is like, go for the ball. If you're tackling, go for the ball. And, maybe they weren't used to that. But again, a few of those uncharacteristic things change. That's still a good game. And it's still, it doesn't necessarily change the outcome, but it changes the dynamic.
Yeah, but to your point with seeding, it begs the question: did Boise State deserve a first round bye?
Right.
And arguably, no.
You can say that almost any team in the second round. Besides Arizona State, I feel like, hey, did they deserve the bye because they ended up getting convincingly beat?
Well, so there's a difference, I think, between like teams that were playing especially at the top of their conference in the Power Four versus and those teams losing versus a team that hadn't really played anything Power Four all season,
right?
Also having the same bye. Oregon, I think, just thought that they were just going to have a rematch and it was going to be the same kind of shootout as they had.
They get kind of like screwed by how their things got kind of turned out.
Well, but the mistake that they made is the same mistake that Tennessee did in preparation for the game. Was instead of coaching to the potential of talent that Ohio State has, they coached to what Ohio State was doing earlier in the season, which both teams learned that's a recipe for disaster, because all Ohio State had to figure out was how to turn themselves loose, turn on the buzzsaw. And so it's I don't really put Oregon in the same boat as the Boise State thing. I think that Arizona State, I think Arizona State is probably the most deserving of the first round bye. Yeah. And they played the hardest out of all of them. I'm not going to give Georgia any excuses. There's absolutely no excuse for why they don't have depth at quarterback. But this is a hypothetical, but that game probably looks a little different if Carson Beck is healthy. But that's not to take away from Notre Dame.
Kirby though too, like Kirby's play call seemed like with the same starting quarterback. It's like your play call has to change.
Yep.
To the quarterback you have. I get it, it's your backup, but it doesn't mean you should be calling the same exact plays. Yeah. 3 weeks to train. Yeah, 3 weeks to practice, but
especially when it's not working out. I think that's the thing is like you're obviously when your quarterbacks are in, your quarterbacks are getting the same type of reps. You're doing the same play calling in practice and game planning and game preparation, all that stuff. But once you see them struggle, I think that's when you change. With Beck, if they struggle, it's just like, okay, he's going to work himself through this. He's been in this situation. We know what he can do. And so we're not going to like back off of, certain plays, certain calls because of it. With a new quarterback, you have to start to go, okay, he is not succeeding in this. We need to, and I hate this term, but we need to dumb it down a little bit. Sure. We need, what are his strengths? What are the throws that we know he can make? And let's put him in a situation to succeed. And Kirby definitely did not look like he did that. And it's pretty sad.
Bobo is pretty atrocious at making those types of adjustments. And he's known for being trash at making those types of adjustments. Kirby's pretty good at making defensive adjustments. That's about all he's really good at.
Yeah.
And so, and you saw some of that. Notre Dame's offense wasn't as impressive second half. But
right.
Still, the benefit that Freeman had is that he was willing to do weird stuff.
Yeah.
He was willing to make gutsy calls, things that Kirby Smart wasn't willing to do for some reason. But again,
it was because the SEC refs told him you can't do it.
Well, there's that.
Too.
That's also, again, that's an officiating thing that, again, it just needs to be solved. The way you solve that, you make all officiants NCAA or one particular, like there's no conference-based officiating,
right?
Because the fact that how much the rules actually change, because I legitimately believe him that he was told that you can't do that by SEC refs, because SEC refs are stupid and they don't tend to know much about the actual game.
Well,
They just
and
throw flags on everything.
Well, and we go back to, the calls in the Arizona State Texas game, where, the field goal that was called no good because it bounced and then went through the uprights. Well, according to the rule book, because
no, that's it. So that's been circulating on the internet. That is actually incorrect. So that is I'm sorry. I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, you're good. You're good.
But so most people that have been circulating that all just ask ChatGPT if that should have been counted as a legal rule, and ChatGPT wrongly summarized the rule book. The moment it hits the ground, it is considered a dead ball.
It's dead. Okay.
Yeah. I think they're confusing.
I digress from that.
But I know what you mean. Yeah.
But then you go, let's move forward, where they don't get the targeting call.
Yep.
That, in my opinion, is clear targeting.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we've gone
through. I don't think anybody has denied that part either.
Just the refs and Texas fans. But like, you go to that call, and I know that particular call wasn't why Texas won, but that call, if I remember correctly, led to Texas getting the ball back and kicking a tying field goal.
Yep.
Which they get that call, game's over. They're running the clock out like it's done. So I don't know. It's just, the rule, again, going back to your initial comment, the rules, the refs need to be in the same organization. It cannot be this Big Ten SEC refs. Oh, they've got a Big Ten crew who's known to throw pass interference calls. Oh, the SEC is not going to
SEC ref, a Big Ten ref, and ACC, mix them up so they all have, I guess, their own specialty or their own faults, I guess, in this case scenario.
Well, I think what they're doing is the conference is kind of leading them in what they're wanting to look for. So the SEC might be leading them into, hey, we don't want this trickery. We don't want these running, we don't want them running the entire team off the field like that, focus on this, where the Big Ten is focused on, hey, pass interference. Like, we want our receivers catching balls. We, make sure you're calling pass interference. The ACC's, I don't know what they do, but so they're all focusing on different things. And, when you get into these big games, SEC teams have been playing with SEC refs all year, and all of a sudden they're changed. And all of a sudden, like the way that the game's being officiated. Now, it's on them to change the way that they're playing to kind of see, when I played sports in high school, it was always like the first 5 minutes of the game, you start seeing, okay, they're not going to let us do this, so we can't do that. So it's up to them to change. However, there does need to be, I think, a little more similarity.
Yeah.
Between
similarity, consistency, all that stuff. And uniformity when it comes to that. Again, I think we've talked about this throughout this past year, but for me, one of the ways that you maintain the integrity of a sport across the board is having consistent rules and people that are consistently upholding the rules as consistently as they possibly can. And you do not see that in football in general. No. You don't see it in college football. You definitely don't see it in the NFL either. So it's just so it's one of those things, like the way, at least in college football, to get at least more consistency is to remove the potential problems of, because the other thing is people want to talk about, it's like, well, or you look at the stats of the teams that are highly penalized versus teams that are low, have very low penalties. And you'll notice some similarities between those teams and which conferences they're in. The SEC throws flags on everything. The Big Ten really doesn't throw flags on much things. They arguably, the Big Ten lets them just play.
Yeah, unless it's Igbeneusen. And he gets the pass interference every other play,
which is different. But it's one of those things, you can tell. I mean, the reason I say that is because when you have some other Big Ten teams or whatever play with an ACC officiating crew or an SEC, or you see them get more penalties than they ever do throughout the year. And it's just because there's just this crazy inconsistency. So the metric even of which teams are highly penalized versus which ones, that's all skewed because we don't actually have a metric. We don't have a actual plumb line of consistency. But I mean, yeah, I agree with you in the sense that I think when it comes back, going back to the playoffs, the seeding thing is going to be something that's really going to have to be addressed going forward. Just, I think some of the first round actually felt pretty right. Like it didn't feel bad. Like it was more, there was more parity there than I expected there to be. SMU was probably the most, Indiana just, again, ran into a really excited Notre Dame team that I think has proven that they deserve to be there. And it's requiring all three of us to eat our words. So, but and the thing is, it's just one of those things. Like the only game that weekend that I was really not super excited for was probably the SMU game. I'm trying to think of other games that were kind of like, no, like the again, Ohio State, Tennessee turned out to be a blowout, but that's because Tennessee, again, we talked about earlier, Tennessee prepared for the wrong version of Ohio State.
And I think like this a little bit Ohio State UT, and it's a little bit talking in regards to the seeding. Like nobody knew what Ohio State was.
Yeah.
Like, and that's kind of the thing that you look into this seeding issue. Like, obviously, I think Oregon fans especially are complaining about being the number one seed and being in arguably the hardest kind of part of the bracket. Like they were going to get Ohio State or Tennessee, two great teams. And so I hear that, but it's also, again, nobody knew who Ohio State was. This is a team that lost to Oregon by one on the road and with a chance to kind of win if things change and go a different way, who lost to Michigan as 21-point favorites, and really looked going into the playoffs like, who are they? And again, like you've said, they met their potential. So maybe they weren't an 8 seed based on talent, but based on visual, like what we've seen, what your record is, they were. Yeah, they were an 8 seed. And so this is one of those for like Oregon, like, too bad, so sad. Sorry, you just happened to be the number 1 seed in a season where the number 8 seed might be the best team and had maybe the most talented roster and just turned it on for the playoffs. So I don't think that this is necessarily this playoff isn't indicative of the seeding being a bad thing. I think that it's just, man, this is kind of a weird one. Like you had a very talented Ohio State team that didn't show that during the year, but then all of a sudden the switch clicked. You have an Oregon team who was talented, but maybe they were a little cocky. Maybe they were a little, we're looking over some people. So it's an interesting, and we'll wait to the end to kind of see, I think, my overall thoughts on the seeding in the playoff, but I don't really care too much about the seeding, but what I do hate is all the teams that were on the outside looking in that were making lots of
making a bunch of noise.
Maybe
shouldn't have been making noise.
Now, I don't want to cut off this segment too early, so we can get to that later if we have more to talk about here. But
well, I mean, like I think the coolest thing, and again, we're going to talk about this later too, is that this playoff has already started to show the new parity that's found in college football from a talent perspective, which is great, talent and coaching perspective. We'll dive more into that a little bit later. But the other thing is, I think the other big thing is with what we've seen so far with teams on the field is that we're seeing teams now either play to their potential or play above their potential. I think that's Notre Dame right now. I think they're playing above their potential. And
Penn State.
And Penn State, and because I feel like Penn State's like, you know what, we actually have something to prove because they've basically proved nothing over the past few years.
The James Franklin era.
The James Franklin era of always losing to a top 10 team.
Of mediocrity.
Yep. And so it's one of those things, like, especially with the field, the playoffs being narrowed by and not being dominated. I don't like using that word, but let's say dominated by SEC teams, or dominated by one particular conference. Right now, there's really 3 conferences technically being represented, because as much as Notre Dame doesn't want to admit it, they are an ACC team. They're the best ACC team out there. They could destroy every ACC team.
True.
I know that they'll get so mad. They really are more like a Big Ten team, but but anyways,
Big Ten by play style,
sure.
But ACC, but and location, but
yeah, ACC
everything
by
about them is Big Ten, but the conference they play in.
Yeah. They pad their schedules year in and year out with ACC with ACC teams. So it's one of those things. Like, I think that every year what we're going to see going forward, because of the parity, because of the different talent levels, because of the portal, things like that, there's always going to be a question going into week 1 of, well, were there better teams that could have been playing? And then 2, it's like, where's this team been all year?
Right.
And so it's just, I think we're starting to see a good side of the new playoff system, because it's giving certain teams a breath of life that they've never had before. I know Tennessee was just happy to be there, so they didn't look any different than they looked all year, which is something that Heupel's going to have to fix if he wants to actually do something in the playoffs. Ryan Day knows all about that.
Honestly, I feel like it kind of goes to show the entire playoff thing. Even the teams like SMU, where people felt like they shouldn't have been there, or Clemson, where I feel like how the playoffs going after now the second week into the playoffs, I feel like the way they had the playoff bracket kind of turned out to be, I feel like it was definitely perfect, honestly. Because part of me was feeling like maybe 12 teams is too big, 8 teams should have been ripe, and then I'm like, looking back, I'm like, blowouts are going to happen regardless, and I feel like 8 team is too. Well, would seem ideal, but I feel like 12 teams, like, it gives those teams like in the outside another opportunity to create those upsets and kind of make just overall the college football playoffs a bit more exciting.
Right. Sure. Well, and you've got the talking points of, you talk about Oregon right now. One of the excuses was like, oh, well, Ohio State got warmed up and Oregon had to wait 3 weeks. It's like, Ohio State waited 3 weeks from their game, their last game.
They didn't play in the Big Ten.
They didn't play in the Big Ten, so they waited through. So, but you have those kind of storylines of like, the rest versus rust, like what's going to be the biggest playoff there. But I mean, I think like I would not want it to go to 8. I know I've seen that too, where people are like, oh, we just need to have 8 and we just need it to be no buys. The only thing, it's like, if you're wanting it to change, go up, not down. Go to 16, and then just everybody plays, and there you go. Now, you go to 16, conference championships are dead if you go to 16. So I don't want it to. I think just keep it.
12, I feel like it's a bit exaggerated. I feel like or 16 is a bit exaggerated. I feel like 12, it barely gives enough for the conference championship. Still matters,
right?
But still loses some of its credibility, to be honest. But for the most part, it still matters at the end of the day.
It's again, it goes back to seeding. And again, that's where you've got some coaches who have talked about the seeding and changing and all this kind of stuff. And the conference championship, I think, becomes a kind of a catalyst to that seed. And I think it adds an extra dynamic to kind of how you're coaching, like how you're going into games, how how much are you really how much effort are you really gonna put into winning a conference championship versus maybe not, all these kind of things. So I think it adds a different like kind of mental element to everything. That's very interesting. It could make for some interesting outcomes.
Sure. Well, there's one other thing that this playoff season and bowl season has proven, and it goes to our next point. They need to fix the portal. Gee whiz. Like we've talked about it kind of here and there a little bit, but like I'd love to hear what y'all's thoughts are on like ways to actually fix the portal. Because again, everybody's just like, well, just push the deadline back, or just make it to where if someone transfers during the live period, they can automatically start playing for a team. It's like all of those things they forget a lot of the nuance of these guys are also they're enrolling out of school,
Right?
Yeah.
And so, what kind of timeline
I
do we need
honestly
to
like. I like what Arizona State head coach was doing, Kenny Dillingham, where he literally told his players like, "Hey, if you're thinking about transferring, or even if you go into transfer portal, you're still on this team." He still made them very active, and honestly, like the more I've seen things about him, the way he treats his coaching staff, his players, I feel like it's hard not to like the guy. Like it's so hard not to like him.
Oh yeah,
like I'm already just the way he's kind of handled his entire team. I'm like I've been a big fan, and I can't wait till what he's able to do next year, honestly, with his team. But the fact that he's still saying, "Hey, you're still on my team. You're still on this team. You're still playing with your brothers. You're still." I'm like, I feel like he's doing exactly what everybody would want a coach to do. While when these larger programs, I'm not saying that these coaches are not doing it or anybody in that coaching staff is not doing it. I just haven't heard it personally. Like where it's like, I haven't heard anybody from Texas do that. I haven't heard it from anybody Ohio State do that. And again, no harm to them, but it's just like them being bigger schools and having a bigger eye, them having a bigger voice. You would have heard like maybe something of that even came out as a rumor or anything like that. I personally haven't heard of one. So a small school like Arizona State being that on the front page about it kind of says a lot compared to other schools.
Well, and I think what you look at there is obviously, the term CEO has been thrown around a lot for a head coach now, that they're the CEO. And just like CEOs at big companies, CEOs at big companies aren't going to be able to have face-to-face interactions with a lot of the people throughout the year because they got a big company. CEOs of smaller organizations are able to do that a little bit more. So obviously it's not going to happen. I mean, when it comes to the portal, I think that the portal should be opened for the end of the year, the day after the playoffs, the day after national championship is played, the portal opens. I think one of the issues that you see now is you see players on teams like I like you're part of the team. Like you said, Arizona State, the coach being like, hey, regardless of if you leave to go somewhere else, you are part of this team. You were on the team this year. You're part of our crew. You see that. I think you see that a lot of other places. The problem is that there are teams right now who are still playing for a national championship.
I mean, he was saying this before their game. He was saying this weeks before.
No, I know. But what I'm saying is I think a lot of people feel that way. But what you find is that the teams who are playing for a national championship, now you've got these kids who are like, I've been on this team and I want to be with my brothers and I want to be here, but I'm a fifth-year senior and I know that I'm, fifth on the depth chart at tight end. So if I want to play next year, I've got to go. So even though we're still in the hunt, I got to put myself in the portal because I want to go play next year. Sure. And so I think it kills some of that. Like those guys don't get a chance to continue on with their team. They don't get a chance to, even if they're not playing, to be with their brothers during this national championship run. And likewise, if you look at it from a team aspect, Arizona State, right? Recruiting is going to be a big deal for them. Transfer portal is going to be a big deal for them. And because they did make it as far as they can, or as far as they did, they're going to have less time in the portal. Like because they made it and they won the Big 10 or Big 12, sorry, they now have less time kind of in the portal, talking to players, doing all that because they were focused on the playoffs.
Sure.
And really they're a team that could really use the portal and really needs to have that time. Yep. So I just think that like certain teams it's an advantage for because you're not, maybe you played a bowl 3 weeks ago and now you're good. Certain teams it's not. And so there's just this unfair balance. And if it was just affecting the top teams, the Ohio States who, hey, you're going to have 20 guys leaving the portal because there's more talent coming next year. Like that's fine if it's affecting those schools, but I think it's also negatively affecting the Arizona States and the SMUs and the teams who had really good seasons, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's just going to carry over next year. They need the portal. And so I think you got to start it after the national championship. It has to be a, no tampering until until after then. So
yeah,
that's my thought. Long-winded thought.
I agree. I think what you do is you just basically open up the month of February. It's the shortest month in the year, and it's like that's portal month, and there's no spring portal. You just remove the spring portal. It's like there's really no reason for people to be transferring in and then transferring out a few months later. Like that's just that opens up so many NIL problems. And a potentially just corruption in a lot of respects. You saw that with Caden Proctor at Alabama. He goes to Iowa, steals basically all their NIL money, and then goes back to Alabama, probably getting more NIL money. It's like, sorry, but that's unethical. And you should there. It should mean something from a standpoint of you're transferring to another school. There are consequences for every action.
Right.
And so it's just like you should have a consequence for transferring out. If you're like, you know what? No, I'm going to, I love the idea of like, hey, I'm going to declare for the transfer portal, but until my team is finished playing all their games, I'm going to play with my team.
Right.
And they could theoretically announce that at the end of the regular season. They could go, I'm actually going to go into the portal in February, but my team is playing in the playoffs or is playing a bowl game. I'm going to play with them. And that's the standard that's set for the players. And I think NIL has to somewhat be tied to bowl games too. The thing that we've been hearing all year is that bowl games don't mean as much as they used to. Now, I personally think that bowl games should mean something, but unfortunately players don't act that way.
Right.
And some players do because coaches are coaching them right. And then others are just like, hey, you know what? I get it. Just go get your bag. Like that's all that matters. That's all that matters. Come on. That's really what it boils down to.
Well, and I think, go ahead. Sorry.
No, what are you going to say?
I was just saying, I think where this is headed, obviously the amateurism is gone, right? Like this is not, this is turning into essentially like a baseball feeder program, a minor league. There you go. And so what I think is going to end up happening is you're going to start getting these in. You're going to start NIL is essentially going to be contract. I'm going to have a contract and I'm going to be paid per game, and then we're going to have riders tied to bowl games, playoffs, all those things. Where it's like, okay, my NIL deal is for $10 million. Well, whatever it is, it's $1 million. If we win a bowl game, I get an extra 500,000. If if we make it to the playoffs, you know what I mean? Like you have these NFL contracts that are all tiered to, the incentive base. And so I think that's because realistically, you are going to still have the, 1, 2, maybe up to 10 players on your team who are, okay, I'm going to the draft. And so now they're weighing that option of like, okay, I'm going to be a first round pick. So maybe passing up on this $500,000 for playing in this game or winning this game. That's not for me. That's, I'm going to step back. However, you might have 3 or 4 guys who are like, man, I'm going to be 4th, 5th, 6th rounders. So that extra 500,000, I'm going to play for that. So I think that's where it's going to end up being, which again, I hate the fact that name, image, likeness, like getting paid for, signing autographs at a car dealership, local car dealership is kind of where I think that was supposed to be. And now it's like just contracts.
Just pay me money.
Just pay me money.
And it's like, if it's going to just turn into that, then just turn them into employees. And your 5-star super important employee gets $80,000 a year in the regular.
I think there was a school that did that. I'm trying to remember which school. Actually,
so Chip Kelly proposed that at UCLA. Yeah. I don't think they ever did anything with it. He proposed it though while he was at UCLA, which I agree with. I agree. Like you've got the money, might as well just go and just make them employees, like that allows you to pay a third stringer $40,000 a year. Plus they also still get an education. You got this uptick in scholarship athletes. So you're really able to, as a school, have even more value added. Everybody wants to say, well, I just wish they would just play for their education. And I'm like, problem is it wasn't actually helping them.
Right.
Like it really just wasn't. And there's too many too many stories, and I get it, like it might be anecdotal, but there's too many stories of a player that was very promising from a standpoint of a NFL draft stock. He gets injured in his final season, being a team player, and is now destitute. It's like,
Right.
I'm sorry, but college football is a multi-billion-dollar industry, just like the NFL is. There's no reason why there can't be enough parity in pay to at least make sure that people are taken care of. That's one of the big wins that I think Deion Sanders got signed was like making sure that there was a proper insurance in play for all of the players.
Right.
If they get injured and it ruins their future, they at least are going to be set up for life and they're not going to have to worry about it.
Right.
And it doesn't mean they're going to make the same amount of money they would make in the NFL, but at least they're going to make something where they're not going to be destitute.
You're not getting nothing.
Their insurance policy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think that I feel like the portal just needs some minor tweaking.
I think the portal is a step or two away from being right.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's just like you said, minor
That
tweaks.
part where it's like the academics part is gonna be the biggest obstacle, though. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of the day, even though they're getting paid to be athletes now, they're still students. Students are still in that title.
Yeah, it's still there, and I think that I just lost my train of thought, but no, I think so. Going back to the Caden Proctor thing, where it's like when you sign an NIL deal, again, going back to the February, if you have a February, hey, month of February is our portal. That's when you can go, like, and it's a year. You are like, once you sign in February, you're there. You can't. There's no more changing. If you don't want to play and you want to sit out, that's fine. And then schools can kind of tie NIL to your games played, all that kind of stuff. Like that. That's where that kind of needs to go. But I think February, it's like once you've signed on February, you're there. You're there for a year. Like there doesn't need to be another out. You had your chances. You made your decisions. Lie there.
Well, exactly. Well, and so like the portal and NIL, both of those things have created, as just into our next topic, they've created this parity of college football, and not in a great way, in the sense of when we saw it in this bowl season. We saw it in the sense of we saw an Illinois team go and take out a team that was chirping a lot before the playoffs started that they deserve to be in the playoffs. And arguably, even some of us were like, you know what? I wouldn't be too upset if South Carolina made their way into the playoffs. Like they're more deserving to us in our eyes than an Alabama team.
Right.
But then you also have an Alabama team.
Oh, Alabama team.
Yeah. Well, and then you have an Alabama team who decides to they think they're just going to win. I don't know what happened in their bowl game, but they went in, and again, they went up against a Michigan team that just had something to prove.
Yep.
And
we're also missing some of their best players.
But that's what I'm saying. Even with that, with Alabama playing a bunch of their starters and Michigan playing a bunch of second and third stringers, what Michigan proved is that the spirit of football can carry you a long way. And the other part of the parity that's being created is the fact that these guys that are so money driven and getting their bag and all this other kinds of stuff, they're being shown to be the fools, because that's really what it boils down to. Is these guys like people are like, well, Milroe decided to play because he's going to go to the draft and whatnot, but he's going to be a high draft pick. Probably not anymore. But he's like, yeah, he's going to be a high draft pick or whatever, but he's being a team player. And I'm like, no, he's really not. It's just, he knows he's probably been begged by this coaching staff to play. And that's why Kalen DeBoer's not mad at him when he's screwing up like crazy. And I'm just like, I don't blame Milroe for being.
I give Milroe a little more credit, unlike Cam Ward, who decided to just like, no, I just want to set the career record and then sit out the entire second half. When literally the last play, or the last drive that they had with the ball for Miami, it was literally a game-winning one where they could beat Iowa State. So it's like all you have to do was get in field goal range, but Cam Ward is like, "Nah, I'm good."
Yeah,
I'm like, I get it. You're a potential top 3 pick in the draft, but it's just like, you really gonna go out like that?
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing. The other part of that is, it isn't Cam Ward's responsibility to be the defense.
Right.
Miami had a defense on the field, but it doesn't show on the scoreboard. So and that's the case all season long. Like he carried that team to be where they were, period. And but I agree with you. I think if you're going to play a game, you play the game. You don't just play half the game and then sit it out. And
especially when you're going for a record, and that's what he was doing. Is he was going for a record.
He literally his actions said like, I only care about the record. Like, screw this team, regardless if my defense has been there, hasn't been there all year or not. Like,
I don't know if he really said screw the team. I don't think he said
his actions did.
His actions may have.
His actions certainly did.
Let's look at another player who had a potential to beat a record, but decided to be willing to sacrifice that so that potentially his team had a better chance of winning. It's Ashton Genty. Ashton Genty easily could have continued to just pound the rock, and they would have just handed the ball to him. But you could tell he knew
he wanted
that was
to
not
win.
going to get them anywhere. And he knew that wasn't going to get them anywhere. Even if it got him he was able to break that record, which I don't think he would have, but let's say he did.
I think he probably would have. He had still a good solid 8-9 minutes.
Sure,
but maybe
in the game.
Again, Penn State's rush defense is pretty stinking good. So
I'm not saying they weren't. You already had 104 yards though, and they didn't run the last 9 minutes.
I understand. Yeah.
So but all that to say, the mentality of the players.
And so this parity is also exposing players that are just in it for money. Which again, there's nothing wrong with being just in it for money, but people now you can see through their motivation a little bit more easily. And I think it's gonna encourage more teamwork type play, because that's arguably what you've seen out of Ohio State over the past 2 games, is a team that is not playing like a bunch of all-stars. It's actually a team that's playing like a team.
A talented team who's all willing to do whatever needs to happen to win.
It's like the Detroit Lions. Like, you've got the Detroit Lions. The head coach has said, he's like, I only want football players on my team. And so it's like you see that kind of that fire in Ohio State and how they've been playing. It's like, and I think you saw that with Arizona State. You see players that just want to play football. And they don't care how they get to where they get to the win. Right. They just want to win. And sometimes that can lead to you blowing another team out. And sometimes it's going to be neck and neck. The reason why Texas won is because arguably Texas has just a deeper roster, you've got more talent at all the skill positions just across the board, even if you have an arguably worse quarterback. So I think yours needs to go.
For the games of specifically for Texas and Boise State, how important special teams is, because I feel like if their kickers were actually kickers, they would have actually Texas probably could have won the game.
Oh yeah.
Like, to the conversation that Luke was saying earlier, like, hey, they're down a field goal. They missed 2 field goals, I believe, too. And then Boise State is like, dude, like, how many field goals are you gonna miss regardless if it's 30 yards or 40 yards? You can't make anything. So it changes the play call, the whole dynamic of any game overall.
Well, yeah, we got a comment here. Edits. I mean, hey, we're all we're all recovering from the holidays, but well, for the most part, we've been out. Just decided to do more family stuff for the holidays, but we're glad that you're here and joining us. I think you're pretty close to being right with Notre Dame versus Ohio State.
Except I don't want the payback.
I don't know if you're going to get the payback. But if there's a defense that could potentially bring some, reel in some of the craziness in Ohio State right now, it's probably Notre Dame, and that's probably
their secondary is definitely one of the top ones out there.
I think it's just like both Ohio State and Notre Dame are the ones that are kind of running the rhythm. They're both on feeling a whole lot of momentum. They're the only two
both feeling good. Yeah, and Marcus has been keeping the right number of players on the field most of the time.
That's
Even
usually
with even when they're running everybody off the field
and then swapping back
everybody
on.
back on, they still have the same amount of players. So
it's great.
Seems like he's learned.
That's right. He learned. But yeah. So do we want to just do a quick preview of the games that are upcoming?
Let's do it.
So obviously we've got Ohio State. That who are they playing again? Who are they playing the second weekend? Oh, the Horns down. The Horns down. The Longhorns. I will say my personal opinion about this matchup. Again, I feel like Texas is not playing to their potential like Ohio State is. Ohio State is currently playing to their potential. Texas is at a roster level. Texas is probably the only team left in the playoffs that matches the talent level of Ohio State from a roster perspective. The problem is it doesn't look like they're actually firing on all cylinders. It's like they've got like an 8. It's like they got a V8, but they're like running like a 4-cylinder right now.
Keep in mind though, Will Howard has never been able to beat Texas. He's actually very similar Ohio State and Michigan record, 0-4 versus Texas.
Well,
I'm just saying.
Quinn Ewers has also never beaten Ohio State.
It's also true.
But he's beating Michigan.
Yes.
Here's the thing. Regardless of what happens in this upcoming game, it just sets up a beautiful story for week 1 next year.
It does.
Where it's a revenge game for one of the
revenge games for one. Yep. Yeah. No, I think it's going to be an interesting game. The feeling that I have right now as an Ohio State fan goes back to our last national championship. Where, it was the year that we had 2 quarterbacks hurt, third stringer going into the Wisconsin game. We blew the Big Ten championship against Wisconsin, blew them out, and then went into the playoffs where I had zero expectations. It was like with a hurt quarterback kind of going into that Big Ten champions, like we could lose this. That was the Melvin Gordon year where he was having insane numbers. So that's where I've been each game. It was like, okay, we beat UT. Like, no offense to UT. I'm not saying anything about them. I'm like, I didn't expect it. Cool. Let's move on. I don't know about Oregon. Like, obviously I picked Oregon to win the national championship this year. So I literally, I don't know what to expect. We've seen some great things from Ohio State for 2 games. I really hope that continues, but I've also seen the Ohio State that lost to Michigan. I've seen the Ohio State that had a hard time against Nebraska. So I'm hoping that Ohio State wins.
Also in Texas, from Austin to Dallas is not too far.
True.
Yeah. The game's location does favor Texas in that regard.
Sure.
But one thing we know about Ohio State's fan base, like Tennessee's, they travel well.
Especially when they're not upset at their coach anymore.
Yeah, that's true.
So that's a benefit.
Yeah. It went from fire Ryan Day to, this guy's pretty good. I like
He's all right.
Not too bad.
Good. Especially if he wins a natty for you guys. You're gonna
we're gonna start threatening to fire him every year. We're like, oh, you're playing for your job this year, Ryan. It's like, dude, I've won 4 national championships in a row. Yeah, I don't care.
But but then for
the tradition right there.
No, right. Yeah.
For the next matchup, which again I think is equally just as interesting for this upcoming weekend. I think we've got 2 arguably phenomenal games ahead of us that could be really good. But you got Notre Dame versus Penn State.
Yep.
Both teams, I didn't expect to be where I didn't expect them to be where they were. I figured that Penn State would find a way to back into the playoffs, which they did. They technically did, but they've kind of proven that they have some reason to be there.
Yeah, I mean, I think their defense, especially their edges, are their edges are elite, and I think they're keeping them in a lot of games. They're doing They're doing great things. I did not expect Penn State to be in the Final Four. I think and this is where I'm going to sound like I'm contradicting myself a little bit here, but I think they are a team that benefited from, like you said, they kind of backed into the playoffs, not in a bad way, not saying anything poor about the team. But they did, they were third in the Big, or well, second in the Big Ten, I think, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
And so they did what they needed to do in the regular season. They got into the playoffs, and then I think they had a very favorable playoff matchup. Their path in the playoffs was not as difficult as some others, and so I think it was very favorable for them. They got there, and now they have a chance to, get to the national championship. Notre Dame, I see very similar to Ohio State, where throughout the year, obviously they had, much like the loss that we had to Michigan, they had one arguably worse to NIU, and just kind of like that had everybody questioning them, and they just kind of steadied, made it to the playoffs, and now they're playing some of their best football all year with what they're doing. So I think it's going to be a fun one. I'm not even looking at my my bracket because I think it's already 100% busted. But I like it's here. I'm calling a Notre Dame Ohio State. Not a championship.
Fair enough. Yeah, I think Notre Dame's gonna win against Penn State. And especially since Ryan Leonard just sucks. He sucks so bad. He's so bad. And I'm just glad that he's humble enough to admit it.
Yeah. His mom tells him every single week. So
yeah, their defense is just playing on fire. It's playing lights out in a way that I wasn't expecting them to play, especially considering how much they lost this past year. But then second, they're figuring some stuff out on offense that is making them more of a dual threat, which is not something you would have said about Notre Dame even 4 games ago. Yeah. So the fact that they've kind of found their passing game is pretty impressive, and they're
active versus Georgia.
Yeah, well, yeah, and they're the fact that their receivers, who have been basically non-existent all year, have found ways to win routes, to get open, stuff like that. Again, Penn State's not in pushover defense, but neither was Georgia.
Right.
And if I was putting the 2 different defenses on the field, I would pick Georgia's. But it's just one of those things that Penn State has right now a better clicking offense than Georgia does. Yeah. So Notre Dame's going to have some more challenges, but I think it's going to be another brawl beat. Like we're talking probably 14-10 kind of game.
Yeah.
It's going to be super low scoring. But again, I feel like Notre Dame's going to find a way to steal the momentum early on.
As for Notre Dame's going to score at least 4 touchdowns, to be honest.
Yeah, that's possible. Yeah.
I don't see it being a low scoring game for both teams. Maybe for one, but not both.
Sure. No, the weird thing with the Ohio State Texas game is it really depends on I think Ohio State's unlocked something. I've got more confidence that they're going into this game with the right mindset, the mindset they've had the past 2 games. I think that they've unlocked that. They've figured it out to some degree, and they're just going to continue rolling forward. They're just, again, as I've said, they're a freight train. They're a buzzsaw. They're just going to try to destroy everybody in their path. If Texas plays to their potential, to Texas's own potential, then you might find the first freight train that might be able to stop them, or at least slow them down immensely, just from a pure talent to talent on roster perspective.
Sure.
I think coaching still lends more towards Ohio State because Chip Kelly's figured things out. And Knowles really knows he's locked. He's got that defense dialed in. But it's one of those things like I still don't think that I don't know if Texas if it's going to be a SEC championship where it's going to be super low scoring, or it's going to be crazy. Like the defense is just unlock or the offense is unlock, and it just becomes a shootout. And my gut leans to more the low scoring side of things, and Ohio State pulling out the win there too. I don't with what Texas has put on the field, I just don't see them winning. So,
All right, Dennis, what do you have? What's going on with you?
No, I mean, I think Notre Dame is definitely going to run away. I think versus Penn State though. Like I said, I think it's going to be. I think Notre Dame's usually going to get probably 4 touchdowns. I'd be surprised. Uh,
Are they going to get the point afters?
3 out of 4.
3 out of 4. Okay. So 27 points. All right.
Like 3 out of the 4, but no, they might end up going for 2 though. I can actually see that part. I mean, he loves going for 2, so I wouldn't be surprised if he does.
Yeah.
But to you and what Michael was saying though, I think Ohio State has the potential of actually kind of running away with the kind of the game. I feel like with Texas though too. If Texas is going to play anywhere they played Arizona State, mind you, I don't think Ohio State has the potential to play like how Arizona State does, the whole like gritty type of game.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not what Ohio State is best at.
No.
Like they're very high, just dynamic, high octane offense when it comes to passing. If Will Howard is able to get that 300 yards, I feel like it's going to be at least a 3-touchdown game for Ohio State beating Texas.
Are you saying by 3 touchdowns?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Like if he's able to get to those yards.
If he's able to do
that.
Yeah.
Like if he's saying he's like around like the low 200s, like anything below 220, I'll be surprised if he has more than 2 touchdowns thrown.
Yeah, well, again, if Ohio State's having to rely on the run game to open up the pass game, that hasn't worked for them all season.
No, I understand. That's what I'm saying, though. Like, I'm not saying that they're not going to be able to. I just don't see it, though, because the way I've seen Ohio State kind of play, excluding the Oregon game, because obviously their passing game is what opened up the run game.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that was the complete opposite of what you normally would see with any kind of game or just typical game plans.
Sure.
But I feel like if they just kind of focus on that part, like if they focus on the passing game to open up the run game, then they're going to win. If they have to do it the other way around, it's probably not going to be Ohio State's game.
Yeah.
Like they have to their strength, and that is.
I told my dad watching the Michigan game with him.
Yeah.
I was like, this is not Ohio State's. This is not what they do. They have to pass to open up the run. They are never going to be able to run, especially on a good defensive front like Michigan and like Texas, because Texas and
they have a great
defensive fronts are very similar. So you're not going to run on them if you're running to open up the pass.
Yeah,
you're going to have to pass. You're going to have to do it often to be able to run. I'm 100% with you on that.
To Michael's credit, the exact opposite is going to be for the other 2 games.
Right.
They're going to have to run to open up the pass.
Right.
Yep.
But for Texas, I honestly don't know because I feel like it could go either way for them.
Mm-hmm.
But if Ohio State able to fire on all cylinders, it's Ohio's game to lose.
Yep.
That's it.
Yeah.
100%. Well, gents, tonight it was a ton of fun to catch back up and do some recapping and looking forward. So we'll reconvene next week. Same bat time, same bat channel, right?
Do we have to pay somebody for that?
No, there's no copyrights on that.
Oh, okay, good.
Good. I'm broke.
Okay, we're all in the same boat there, my friend.
I got some Christmas money.
Mr. Moneybags over here.
Not bags.
Oh, okay.
It's like an envelope. Yeah, it's like
my wife let me hold a quarter.
I think I spend it on my kids too. So
fair enough. Well, we'll reconvene next week and see how good our predictions were for these upcoming games. IO. I tend to be 33% wrong, or 33% right, and there's only 2 games.
There's 2 games.
He's gonna be wrong about both of them, but be right about the match.
That's right.
There you go.
Yeah, it's gonna be weird. Anyways, well, join us next week. Grab a drink and join the conversation.